Welcome back to a chilling night of stories. Here are 3 stories that are sure to keep you awake. First story. This is why I quit my job at McDonald's. When I picked up a job at McDonald's in the winter of 2013, I was the black sheep of the flock among my friends. And not in a bad way either. People started getting shady around me because they were afraid and confused. You see, as a teen living in the urban areas of New York, people fed off rumors, gossip, and urban legends like college kids feed off ramen noodles. My whole life I had been frightened of alligators that were said to live in the sewers and ghosts that dwelt in the Statue of Liberty and could be seen with a keen eye and a telescope. Stuff like this was more fascinating to me than anything, to be honest. I took fun in all the legends I grew up around. My friends, however, seemed to take things too seriously. All my friends really strange. And I don't mean that they licked windows or watched paint dry. They were seemingly normal people on the outside. Once you got to know them, you could easily understand why they were outcasts. But that was fine, because I was one too. Anyway, back to my job. I had taken up the job with enthusiasm, because money was hard to come by in my neighborhood, and getting it without dealing drugs or doing some type of shady shit was even harder. My friends all acted violently when they heard I got the job, telling me all these weird rumors about how the company was all run by Jews, used human flesh in their products, and were tied to the Illuminati somehow. These all gave me a good laugh, and didn't startle me much in the slightest at the time. It would be a few weeks into my job when I would start to take my friends' advice with more open ears. My first few days were hard. I was pushed to work long, exhausting shifts, seldom having freedom over what to do, as the manager would scream my next assignment to me. Despite this, however, I always left feeling a strong sense of pride and accomplishment, which helped me trudge on. Getting my first dosage of money not too far after didn't hurt either. A few weeks into working, I had been put on the night shift in the back preparing food alongside another worker named John. He was a somewhat older man, somewhere in his late 20s. However, despite the age gap, we ended up becoming really good pals in the nick of time. We would tell each other jokes, have nice conversations, had some joints out in the back a few times, and even shared stories about our life when the night shift got tedious. I will admit, though, I did more of the listening than the talking. For not being much older than me, John had a bunch of incredible stories to tell about his time growing up in New York. Out of all the things we ever did together when we were paired together was talk about his daughter. He kept a photo of her in his wallet and would frequently point to it or hold it up so it was visible when he had a new story to tell about her. His daughter was a 6-year-old girl with short black hair and glasses. In his picture, she wore a blue dress with teal buttons running down the center in the fashion of some old-time Victorian bonnet or something. I didn't have to have thought about the photo to even explain that with all the talking he did about her, though. I could tell he was a really great guy by his life for his daughter. A little while in the future, I had to call in work on a Sunday evening due to snowy roads, and I was snowed in for the day. Or so I thought. It turns out my weirdo friends had given me a call telling me to meet them at the park. It was within walking distance, and there was a way you could traverse over there without slipping on the ice-covered roads, so I made my way out to see them. When I finally did meet it out there, they ambushed me with a brief snowball fight, and before we settled down, I made sure I got back at them real good. All huddling on the park bench, we started talking. "So," Isaac said, "how's the job?" I would have told them about all the ups and downs, and how it was worth it thanks to my new friend John. But instead, I was too focused on the depressing last few days at my job, and ended up telling them how uneasy I was about everything. Everyone had been under constant pressure and bombardment to increase productivity due to the winter giving fast food chains all of the East Coast delayed materials. We were expected to work harder than we have ever had to make the burgers, fries, and salads we usually prepared, without enough actual food to complete the burgers, fries, and salads. Bullshit. Worst part is when a customer didn't receive the topping they ordered, or had to be declined a certain menu item. Who did they break down and yell at? That's right, me. I guess I went a little in over my head because my friends started acting up and going on about their urban legends and shit. I remember Ethan leaning in close to me and softly saying, I heard that when they run low on sauces, they use animal semen, among a bunch of other weird ideas. Those are my friends for you. However, this time I was able to deal with their weird outlook on life a little better, that I had some kind of grudge over one of these corporations. They insisted it was evil in some way. They thought pretty much everything was part of some evil scheme. I never understood how someone could be that paranoid. Anyway, a week or so went by, and eventually the roads got safe enough to where I could start going back to work. The weather outside was still nasty, but at least I could feel safe and cozy inside of my car. When I got into work for the first day after the long snowstorm, I was relieved to see John was in the back stacking boxes into the shelves. I walked up to him and started to make small talk. After a little exchange of telling what he had done over our brief break, he had told me that he had his daughter in his truck, as he only had to come in here to get a few things done, and didn't have to work a full shift. He even recommended I meet his daughter here after his shift was over. I eagerly agreed and went about my business until he called me out to his truck. However, when we got to the truck, nobody was in there. John started to panic and frantically looked around everywhere to no avail. I had an awful feeling of unease over me and couldn't keep my body from shaking, but I was sure he had it much more. I remember hugging him and comforting him as the police later came in to form an investigation scene. The next day, John didn't go into work. We stayed at home, either moping after his daughter's recent disappearance or spending time talking to police about the situation and such. I felt incredibly sorry for him and offered to take the day off to console him, but he insisted he was needed time alone. When I went into work, despite the fact John's life had changed drastically so much, even I was affected by it. Everything else seemed to go on as it usually did. Well, there was a slight change. The manager had announced we had a new surplus of materials that just came in. This would make our job a little easier like it was before, even though it wasn't very easy before. After working a little bit, I went on my lunch break. I normally bring my own lunch because after you sit around the same food all day, you can't stand it anymore. But in the whole light of the situation with John's missing daughter, I must have to been too mentally unkempt to have remembered. I was too hungry to run over to the store and buy something else during my brief amount of time. So I grabbed some of the hamburger meat that came in today and grilled up a burger for myself with a Coke and some fries. As I sat down at a table I made for myself, I pulled out one of the copies of the picture John had made of the original picture of his daughter he kept in his wallet. The one where she was wearing the blue dress with teal buttons. After gazing at it for a while, I gently put it away, and I made a little pray before I ate. I was never a religious person, and praying over a McDonald's dinner sounded a little underwhelming, but it was all I could do in the moment. I just felt so sorry. As I took a bite of my burger and chewed around, I felt something weird. I was biting against something hard. Was it a piece of fat? Did I not thaw it properly and some of the burger is still frozen? I wrapped my tongue around the piece and spat it out into my hand. It was a teal button. Story 2. The McDonald's commercial that tried to kill me twice. I can't explain what has happened to me the past few weeks, but I'm gonna try. I was just watching TV as usual, and then the commercial popped up. It was an old-style commercial used to advertise the McDonald's new mascot, Mr. Snuggles. He was a normal clown, with weird makeup and a white dress or gown type thing. But one thing struck me as odd: the bow tie. It wasn't a normal bow tie. Instead, it was made out of 2 red latex gloves like hands. For some reason, this really freaked me out, and I always just flicked to another channel when the ad came on. Until one day, when I was catching up on my favorite soap opera, the drama was interrupted with a deep, almost childlike voice saying, "Well, be right back after the ads." Then a commercial for some kind of snack came on, and in the background, I swear I saw Mr. Snuggles. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, but it was gone. Then a toilet paper ad came on, and again there was a flash of Mr. Snuggles in the background. I turned off the TV and decided that it was time for bed. Obviously, I was seeing things because I hadn't gotten enough sleep. As I was walking up the stairs, I heard something coming from the living room. It was TV static. I looked at the TV from the stairs and saw that it was on. I slowly walked back down the stairs and watched the television cautiously. Suddenly, the channels started playing for just long enough to hear a word. Then they would switch. The words seemed deliberately chosen, as if someone was controlling my TV. First there was an I, then there was a switch, then a will, another switch, then a kill, switch, and then you. I die. Will, Dodak. Kill. You. I will kill you. I didn't have time to register what I'd heard before the commercial came on. It was the McDonald's one. Mr. Snuggles walked into the restaurant, made the same knock-knock joke about the Big Mac, and then it turned and looked at me. "Are you hungry, John?" My eyes widened. It said my name. I grabbed the remote and hit the off button. The TV turned off, and then back on again. This time there was a close-up of the clown with a hideous grin. "That wasn't very nice," Mr. Snuggles said, fake crying. Then it smiled and let out a laugh. "I wonder if you'll try that again," it said, looking at me smugly. I turned it off again. At the same time, the lights turned off in my house. I felt breath on my neck, hot and sticky like some dog. "Knock, knock," it said behind me, straight into my ear. Although I didn't say it out loud, "Who's there?" echoed around in my head. I spun around and flung the remote into its face. It was Mr. Snuggles. It let out a yelp and grabbed at its nose. It quickly got a hold of itself and outstretched its hands for my neck, squeezing. "You shouldn't have done that," it rasped, squeezing harder. I felt my heart beating faster and faster, almost like it was trying to escape from my body. I used my hand to pull the pen out of my back pocket. Making sure that I had enough force, I wound my hand back and stabbed it into the side of the clown's neck as hard as I could. It howled in pain and pulled its hands off my throat. As I gasped for breath, it looked at me with hate and then evaporated into the air. The lights in my house flickered back to life, and I went around my house turning all of them on because I never wanted to be in the dark again. Not after that anyways. I didn't call the police. No way they would believe me. There was no proof, except for a small mark on my neck. But that doesn't mean I didn't try and protect myself. At night, I turned all the TVs away from me so that they were facing the wall. I grabbed a spare curtain rod and kept it next to my bed while I slept. I was strictly against guns and knives, but I still kept a small cooking knife in my bedside drawer just in case. I thought I was prepared. I thought wrong. It was weeks before I was even willing to watch TV again. Even then, I had rules I made to try and make myself feel safe. 1. Never watch commercials. When they come on, I have to switch channels or turn the TV off until they are over. 2. Don't keep the TV on static. 3. Always have a light on in the room and the rooms surrounding the TV room. 4. Have some kind of protection weapon just in case. 5. Never watch any McDonald's-related show, commercial, or movie. I thought that this would keep me from being a target again. Obviously, I hadn't thought of everything, though. One night, I had the TV on while I was cooking food. The kitchen is near the TV room, and it is an open floor plan, so I could see the TV from the kitchen. Then the static came on again. I grabbed the remote and turned it off, dismissing it as a faulty signal. Then the TV came back on again. The channels began changing. "Red E for round 2, the TV said. I froze in fear, knowing that this was no coincidence. Ready for round 2. This was what I'd been preparing for. I grabbed a knife that I was using to cut cucumbers with and held it up. The commercial came on. Mr. Snuggles made the corny joke and then said, "Let's introduce our special guest." Everyone in the restaurant cheered as I walked into the McDonald's. I was watching myself on TV Drake. I was shocked. This was not what I'd been thinking was going to happen at all. "John is here for lunch," Mr. Snuggles said, leading me into the kitchen. I was smiling and walking with him until we disappeared into the chef's room. A few seconds later, Mr. Snuggles came out with a pot. I was nowhere to be found. A small toddler walked up to Mr. Snuggles. "What's for lunch, Mr. Snuggles?" he asked innocently. The clown looked straight through the TV at me. "I already told you." There was a pause. "John." My eyes got wide for the second time watching this ad as I realized what he meant. Then it all went black. I woke up stuck to a ceiling. looking down at what I thought was a kitchen. Mr. Snuggles came into the room and smiled up at me. He made a motion with his hands and I fell down to the floor, no longer bound to the tiled roof. "I'm glad you could join us," he said cheerfully. "No, stop. Why are you doing this?" I shouted. "Because I have to." His smug look faltered for a second. I sounded desperate. "No, you don't. I didn't do anything. I know. But he makes me." "Who?" "My boss." "He doesn't control you," I replied, trying to look understanding. "It's hell," Mr. Snuggles shouted, looking angry. "You think I like what I do? No. I hate him. I hate you. I hate myself, and I hate McDonald's." He looked sad and stared at the floor. "But I have to." He looked at the wall closest to him and pressed a button that was attached to it. The floor opened up and a big pot came out of the hole. It was at least 7 feet tall, and it radiated heat, like it was boiling. He picked up a ladder and put it on the side so someone could climb onto the edge of the pot and presumably get put in it. I looked at him. "I'll make this easy then." Mr. Snuggles looked at me, puzzled. "I'll go into the pot myself without you having to make me. Except for one thing. Can you just tell me how full it is with boiling water?" The clown nodded and climbed up the ladder. He leaned over the side. "Pretty full," he said. I knew this was my one chance. I ran over to him and pushed him as hard as I could. He fell into the pot, screaming as his skin bubbled and burnt off. I felt the restaurant start to crumble, and the world went black. I woke up again in my kitchen, sprawled out on the floor. My head hurt, but other than that, I felt relatively okay. I just pulled out my phone and went to Reddit. I know that people here can have good advice, and if I can hopefully sort through all the people saying this is fake, there might be someone out there who knows what to do. Mr. Snuggles is dead. At least, I hope he is. Because if not, he'll come back and get me. I know he will. This brings a whole demeaning to fast food not being good for you. It certainly hasn't been good to me. I'm gonna take a break from TV for a while, and maybe try out the TikTok app everyone's using these days. I'm never eating at McDonald's again. Story 3. I will never work for McDonald's ever again. Just to preface, I have a lot of scars on my arms. Not because I harm myself, but because my father likes to get wasted and beat me. Sometimes with the beer bottles he smashes after he's done drinking. So yeah, I have scars. Scars from all the horrible shit I've gone through over the years. They go from my wrist up to my elbows, reminding me of all the times I had to protect myself from my father's drunken rage. Because of this, I wear long sleeves at work. That way nobody will make asshole remarks about them. Now, I had been at the McDonald's in my hometown for over 2 years, mostly working nights. One day when I came in, I noticed a sign taped to the ice cream machine. Broken. Not an uncommon thing to happen, but we had just gotten it fixed the week previous. Whatever, I thought. One less thing for me to clean. At around midnight, I was washing the windows across from the counter. All of a sudden, I heard a low humming sound. I turned around to see where it was coming from. It was the ice cream machine. This was weird, considering it was supposedly broken. But I had known some of our appliances to spring back to life without warning, so I wasn't too spooked by it. I walked over to shut the thing off. At about 5 feet away from the counter, I felt what seemed like water running down my arms. I thought it might have been a chill, but as I moved closer, the coolness turned to fire. I felt sharp pains wrapping around my arms, then moving up to my shoulders and down my back. I stopped walking and rolled up my left sleeve. At first, everything looked fine. Nothing unusual. I took another step forward before it hit me, and then looked back at my arm. My scars. They were gone. I quickly rolled up my other sleeve to check. It was the same. No scars in sight. I felt another watery sensation on my back, as if a whirlpool had opened up in my skin. I touched at the area under my shirt and felt it. Skin not properly healed. Was it my scars? Freaked out, I backed up towards the windows. I watched my wounds as they slithered back onto my arms where they had been made. I froze for a moment, then took a few steps forward. My scars moved once again. I moved back and forth, towards and then away from the counter a few times. Every time I stepped forward, my scars squirmed around like worms in the dirt. When I moved away, they went back into place. How was this possible? What was causing my wounds to travel around my body? Once I got used to my scars movement, I decided to search for some answers. I looked behind the counter, near the friolator, and further back by the grills. Then, I noticed something. The ice cream machine had stopped humming. As I moved toward it, my scars began frantically snaking around my skin. Upon closer inspection, I noticed that the damned thing wasn't even plugged in. I opened up the lid, looked inside, and saw a silver liquid sloshing around where the ice cream normally was. I reached my hand towards it, if only out of curiosity. As my fingertips touched the surface, it stopped moving, and my entire hand went numb. I felt a strange feeling come over me in the form of a thought. Was it alive? I put my hand in a little further and felt something within the wet metal. It was rough to the touch, but perfectly round, a metallic sphere of sorts. I tried to pull at it, but when I did, the liquid began crawling up my arm. Frightened, I pulled back and ran right out of the store. Without even so much as saying anything to my manager, I got in my car and drove home, truly terrified of whatever it was I had felt. The next morning, I woke up on the floor of my bedroom. A sudden dizziness compelled me to grab my head. It was warm, borderline feverish. Was the night before just a weird nightmare? Or did I smoke too much after getting out of work? Frazzled, I made my way to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. I placed my hands on both sides of the sink, staring deeply into my own eyes. I then inhaled, closed my eyes, and lowered my head. When I opened them, I noticed it. They were gone. I raised my arms closer to my face, twisting them side to side to check all around. My hands then darted to my back. They weren't there either. I quickly shut the door to the bathroom and locked it. I undressed and scanned every inch of my body. My scars had vanished. Feeling born anew, healed from the troubles of my past, I exited the bathroom with my head held high. I didn't know how or why, but I was thankful. Completely elated, I decided to go about my day, venturing down to the kitchen for some breakfast. As I rummaged through the fridge, I heard a loud thud come from the direction of my father's bedroom. I glanced down the hall and noticed that the door was closed. I tiptoed over and cracked it open a bit, careful not to wake the beast. The room was pitch black. He had hung a blanket in front of the window to block out the light, as he often did when hungover. I felt along the wall for the light switch. When I flicked it on, I saw my father, laying on the floor, his face beaten in. On his arms were scars, but not just any scars. They were mine. I would recognize them anywhere. Next to him was a metallic silver sphere. I didn't scream. I didn't do anything that I probably should have. I just ran. The first week or so after running away from home, after the death of my father, things were relatively normal, in a way. Normal in the sense that I didn't have some magical metal sphere following me around anymore. After fleeing my house, I wandered south. Nearly 6 hours of walking later, I found myself along the interstate. During my walk, I used the time to formulate a plan. What was I going to do next? I remembered I had an aunt that lived further downstate. To get there by car usually took 2 hours, but walking would take me days. I had no other choice but to go there. It was dark, drizzling, and I was very cold. The first night on my own, I slept in some bushes off the highway. When I awoke, the rain had stopped, but I was now laying in a small puddle of water that had formed overnight. It was still a little cloudy, so I had to walk completely drenched until the sun came out. A few hours further into my journey, the sun had finally come out from behind the clouds. It was nice feeling the rays of warmth over me. It made me feel a bit better about the predicament I currently found myself in. I stopped walking for a moment, closed my eyes, and pointed my face towards the sun. I felt a rush of emotions come over me. I was happy I was finally safe from my father and the sphere. Upset that life as I knew it was over, and it would probably never go back to normal. As I stood there thinking over what had happened, I was drawn away from my thoughts by the sound of a truck's horn as it drove past me. I looked and saw a big semi-truck pulling off the road. A man popped his head out the window and looked at me. He gestured his arm for me to come over to him. As I approached the trucker, he asked me what I was doing wandering down the interstate. I told him I didn't have enough money for a taxi, so I was walking to my aunt's house further south. He offered me a ride. For a moment, I weighed my options. I could accept a ride from this generous stranger who could possibly be a serial killer, or I could risk continuing to walk and probably get hit by a car. I chose the latter. I made my way over to the passenger side door, which the man had kindly opened for me. I slid into the seat, which was surprisingly more comfortable than I thought it might be, and laid my head back for a brief moment of rest. After a moment or so, I felt the truck jolt forward as we pulled back onto the highway. The name's Riley Jacobs. You? Katie Knight, I replied, happy to finally talk with a friendly face. Well, Katie, where's a young woman such as yourself heading exactly? Miles City. I have an aunt that lives there. I'm gonna be staying with her for a while. Well, I won't be heading that far, but I can get you pretty close. How's about I drop you off at a bus stop in the next town we come to and give you the money for the trip? Sound good? That would be amazing, I said excitedly. Are you always this generous to the people who ride with you? I try to be. My father always told me, son, if you're gonna be a good man, you gotta help those in need in any way possible. I live my life by that. Man always knew what he was talking about. Your father sounds like he's a good man. He was. Sadly, he passed away a few years ago. Broke my mother's heart. I've managed pretty okay, though. I'm sorry to hear that, Mr. Jacobs. Ha! Please, Katie. Riley will do just fine. Now, why don't you just relax? Only about a half hour or so till we get to the next town. I spent my time staring out the window, taking in the scenery as it flew by. We passed a sign for an amusement park called Daydreamers Park Daddy. My friend Lucas had never been to one. I would have loved to take him there. Too bad my chances of returning home were slim to none. About 25 minutes later, we passed a welcome sign. 1.5 miles to go until we reached the next exit, and I would soon be on a bus to my aunt's. Cheerfully, Riley looked to me and signaled for me to pull a rope drooping from the roof between us. I reached up and tugged on it. The truck's horn blared. Startled, I pulled my hand back. Riley laughed hysterically from my reaction, then gave the rope a few pulls himself. He seemed like a genuinely happy man. As we pulled off the highway and into town, I felt relief come over me. I was further away from home than I thought I would get. Things started to feel good again. I would get to my aunt's house, she would take me in, and everything would be fine. Of course, though, it wasn't. As we pulled off to the side of the road, a bit away from the bus stop, something hit the side of the truck, causing a loud thump. Riley was the first to exit the truck. I followed immediately after. I made my way around to his side and noticed a huge dent in the side of his door. On the ground, motionless, was my worst fear. The only thing that could at this moment send me back into a panic. It was the metallic silver sphere. As Riley reached down to grab it to further inspect it, I instinctively shouted, "Don't!" He looked at me, puzzled, then picked it up anyway. After looking over it a moment, he threw it to me. I grabbed it and quickly stuffed it into my pocket. Realizing I probably seemed like a nutjob right now, I told him I thought it might be a fragment from an asteroid and wanted to keep it for a collection I had. An asteroid? He said, confused. He looked at the dent in the side of his truck, then back to me. I suppose it could be. Explains the size of this dent. He indicated towards his door with his hand. Yay. Something coming down that fast and hard will do a thing like that, I replied awkwardly. But the angle of it, wouldn't it have to have been coming sideways? I looked at the truck, then back to Riley. I had to think of something fast to stop this conversation as soon as possible. Get the money for the bus fare and get out of here. Could have bounced off something. Riley again looked at his truck, then across the street. He took a moment, I presumed to imagine what it could have bounced off of. Finally, he seemed to accept my lie of an explanation. I hid my sigh of relief as best I could. "All right. Well, you best be on your way, Katie. Don't want to keep that aunt of yours waiting." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a few bills. I thanked him for everything and made my way onto an arriving bus at the stop. As the bus pulled away, I waved goodbye to Riley. He had helped me out in a huge way. I would never forget him. When I finally did get to my aunt's, she was surprised to see me. She hadn't heard about what had happened to my father yet. My aunt asked why I was at her house. I just told her that my dad was on a bender and I couldn't stay at any friends' houses. After welcoming in, she told me I could use the guest room for a day or two. Then she would drive me back home. I panicked. There's no way I could go back home. I needed to figure out another plan, but now wasn't the time for that. My aunt said she would make some food for me and that I could use the bathroom upstairs to get cleaned up. I thanked her, gave her a hug, and made my way to the guest bedroom. Once in the room, I closed the door quietly and pulled out the silver sphere from my pocket. I looked at it a moment before stuffing it under the mattress. I went to the bathroom and washed off my face. I heard my aunt call for me. Making my way downstairs, I could hear the sound of the microwave dinging. In the kitchen, I was met with a plate of reheated chicken and a glass of juice. We decided to watch some television as we ate, so I followed my aunt into the living room. While plopping myself down onto the couch, my aunt turned on the TV. It was on the news channel. As I ate, I watched the newscasters do pieces on pointless shit. A new playground being built, hero dad saves cat from tree, stuff like that. After scarfing down my food, I made myself more comfortable, kicking my legs up onto the couch. As I was finishing off my juice, a breaking news announcement came on screen. A man who had been a suspect in the murder of his own father had been found dead at a rest stop on the interstate just 40 or so minutes ago. The man was identified as Riley Jacobs. My jaw dropped. Slowly, I stood up and excused myself from the room. I ran up the stairs to the guest room. When I entered the room, I noticed the window had been opened. I immediately went to the bed, lifting it up in search of the metallic sphere. It was gone. I dropped to my knees. The nightmare I had endured was happening all over again. I rested my head against the side of the mattress and began to cry. That's when I heard a thud by the window. I snapped up, feeling fear rush through me. Slowly, I stood up to see what it was. I felt my heart begin to race. I began to tell myself that it couldn't be possible, that there was no way. When I looked to the floor in front of the window, my fear was confirmed. There on the floor, still covered in a bit of blood, was the metallic silver sphere.